Hi, I'm Elizabeth Otters-White, and I'm excited to welcome you to the second in this series of videos exploring how coaching-based techniques can enhance our effectiveness as leaders. So in the first video, we considered the question of what makes something a coaching-based approach, and then looked at cases in which these types of approaches are especially helpful or may not be appropriate. So if you didn't have a chance to watch that video yet, I think it provides an important foundation. So please check that out and then come back and pick up with this video. Because now we're continuing to think about particular coaching tools or coaching-based techniques and how we can use them, especially in contexts faced by academic leaders. So I do think these apply very broadly to all kinds of leadership roles. I will give examples in some cases that focus specifically on that academic context. And today in this video, we're going to focus specifically on powerful questions. Powerful questions are probably the most fundamental tool that we use in coaching, and they can be used in almost every context. We will look at a few of those many contexts today, and we'll also just start by talking about what are powerful questions, what makes a question powerful. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So powerful questions are those that promote reflection. They broaden people's perspectives, right? They help to shake things loose. And also importantly, they help people feel seen and respected. So I'd like to invite you to take a moment to think about times when you've experienced that, when you've been maybe on the receiving end, or maybe you've been the one asking the questions. What helps make a question powerful? What helps a question have that kind of impact? Please pause the video for a moment to consider that, and then restart when you're ready, and I'll share some of my thoughts on that. Okay, so what helps to make a question powerful? Well, I think open-ended questions tend to be, these are generalizations, tend to be more powerful than yes-no closed-ended questions, right? They just promote a little more reflection and a little more consideration. And in fact, sometimes a yes-no question would be quickly answered with a no, where that same question phrased just slightly differently in an open-ended way can elicit much more thought. Ideally, powerful questions are short and simple. I will say this is not my strong suit. It's not my natural tendency. It's something I continue to work on. But just those, they pack a big punch, just short and sweet. Obviously, they need to be asked with sincerity and curiosity. That's something we talked about in the first video. They position the asker of the question as a partner, right? A thought partner, a sounding board, a collaborator, not an interrogator, not an expert, right? It's really that partnership. Also, I think avoiding the terms or words why and but helps in making a question powerful. I actually have a little short video on that I'll link in the description. The reason is these kinds of little words that may seem not important can really put people on the defensive, or they can get people in their heads kind of overthinking rather than feeling or using the combination of, emotional wisdom and mental logical wisdom, which is really what we'd like them to combine. I shared this in the first video, but I'll just say it again. I think powerful questions are those that get people talking, because the person doing the most talking is the person doing the most learning. I'll say one more thing, and that is that a powerful question doesn't always have to be a question at all. So one of my favorites is, say more about that, right? Or tell me more. I think that can be a great way to continue to get people talking, have them continue talking, and it's not phrased as a question at all. So don't limit yourself in that way. I will share, just to give you a sense, I already gave you one, say more about that. Another one that's actually in the form of a question is, how does that feel? That's one that I often ask when people are coming to a solution on their own. They're sort of exploring something, starting to coalesce or land on something. And I might just ask, how does that feel, right? So they can pause and get that sense. So that gives you kind of a little taste. We'll get into a lot more positive, a lot more powerful, positive too, I hope, questions when I get to these specific examples of the contexts that I'd like to talk through. Powerful questions can be used in a wide range of contexts, as you've probably already guessed based on how I've described them, right? You can use them on yourself through self-coaching or really just inquiry, wondering, maybe journaling, right? You can use them one-on-one with others. You can use them with teams or groups. They can be used when brainstorming. They're just a wide range of ways that we can use powerful questions. I'm going to talk about just a few contexts today. As I said, I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, though, would apply to many different contexts, leaders in different types of industries. So I'd like to start with something that's fairly low stakes, hopefully, and that would be just kind of regular check-ins with most likely direct reports. So let's start thinking about how we can use powerful questions in that kind of a setting. So I'll offer a few examples just to get started, and then I'm going to invite you to pause the video, take a little bit of time to think about what are some powerful questions that you might ask, right? And maybe with your particular direct reports, or if you don't have direct reports, with others that you're meeting with. Let me give a couple to kind of seed things, right, to get it going, and then you can pause the video. So you might ask, what should we make sure to discuss today? Right? So kind of getting at that agenda, helping to co-create that. You might ask, what would make this time together or this meeting the most fantastic use of our time, right? Or maybe if those, that standard's a little too high, what would make this a really valuable 30 minutes or 20 minutes or hour, right? Whatever you've got together. You might just say, where should we start? Right? That's a great question that I use often. Where should we start? It just kind of opens things up. So go ahead and pause the video, as I said, give it a little thought, and then we'll come back together and I'll share some more ideas. I wish this were two-way so I could hear your ideas, your questions that you came up with. If you're brave and willing, I would love it if you would share some of them in the comments, because I'd love this to be more of a conversation. And there are so many good questions. One of the things is it's nice to have a couple go-tos, right? You can kind of rely on them. At the same time, if you're really listening deeply, the questions will come. You don't need to plan too much in advance. So I'll just share a few that came to my mind when I was asking myself this question, right? What might I ask in a one-on-one with a direct report? So I might ask, what have you discovered since we last met? I might ask, what can we celebrate together? I might ask about challenges. So what challenges are you experiencing, or what challenges do you anticipate? Or maybe flip that in more positive framing. We can do both, right? What opportunities do you see? What opportunities exist? I might just, again, in that sort of agenda setting, what would you like to explore together? What's the dream outcome, right? So really sort of that stretching, right? Remember we talked about like shaking things loose or shifting perspectives, broadening perspectives. We might ask, how would you like to approach that, right? If they're kind of getting into some specifics, or what's your next step, right? When we're really getting into action, maybe near the end of a conversation. We might help to assess their confidence, right? Like, how confident are you on a scale from 1 to 10 that you can kind of take that next step that you articulated? Or what kind of support do you need? Maybe how can I be most helpful, right? So again, there's an infinite number of questions that we could ask, right? But in these kind of low stakes settings, these are some examples that come to mind. So we talked about sort of this just kind of regular routine check-in. What if we are interacting with someone and we start to realize that they're feeling stuck, either because they've expressed that or just that the things that they're sharing, it's clear that they're feeling stuck. Again, powerful questions can be really helpful. I think I mentioned this in the introductory video. So let's do a little bit of brainstorming again. I ask you to pause the video, invite you to pause the video and think about what are some questions you might ask someone, whether it's a colleague, a direct report, as we were talking about earlier, perhaps a more senior leader, right, that you are helping. What are some questions that you might ask someone who is stuck? Okay, so questions when someone is stuck. And I guess I should even pause before getting into these and say there are varying degrees of stuckness, right? So we always want, I talked about how listening can really drive our questions. We want to make sure that we are not putting the person in a position where they're feeling sort of interrogated or like we're asking questions that they have no answers to. It's fine for them to have no answers. That's perfectly fine. And I think it's great to express that to people. You don't have to know the answer. It's good to just kind of ask the questions and consider them, even if no answers emerge. Sometimes answers do emerge, though. At the same time, we don't want to hammer people, right? We don't want them to feel undue pressure. So depending on their level of stuckness, I might encourage them to really step back, and I might ask something like, if you had a magic wand, if you could wave a magic wand, how would things look here? You know, to really help them get in touch with what it is that they want, right? Kind of fundamentally. Connected to that, I often ask people, how do you want to feel? I already mentioned earlier, I like to ask, how does that feel? How do you want to feel? So we get so caught up in the specifics of I want to accomplish this, or I want to check this off the list, or there's this goal, without sometimes stopping to think about how do we want to feel. That can be a really helpful guide to getting unstuck and taking action, making decisions. Similarly, if you could do, like, pretend you could do whatever you wanted. Just suppose you wouldn't be letting anybody down, nobody would be angry, there would be sort of no consequences. What would you do? And then other similar things like, what questions do you have about this? What are you wondering about, right? So maybe that stuckness reveals a need for more information. What do you need to know in order to make a decision or to choose a next step? How would it feel to just take a baby step, right? What baby step are you ready to take? Again, how can I be most helpful, or what kind of support do you need, and where can you get that support? What has worked in the past, right? These kinds of things. I think all of these can be really helpful. All right, so another helpful framework is called WOOP. It's a framework called WOOP by Gabrielle Ettingen. The sort of formal name of this technique is Mental Contrasting with Implementation Intentions, MCII, but it uses the acronym WOOP. So the W in WOOP stands for wish. So again, this is kind of like the goal. Maybe it's even a little loftier than a goal, right? Like, you want it to be challenging. You do want it to be feasible. So it's not like a, pipe dream, but like, what is your wish? O is outcome. So this is about really like visualizing, embodying, considering carefully what is the best possible thing that could happen if your wish comes true. Okay. So W-O, another O, and that is obstacle. So this is where that contrasting comes in. What is the biggest inner obstacle? So we can also consider outer obstacles. This technique is really just designed to look at inner obstacles, right? So often this is some kind of a limiting belief, something that's holding us back. What is the main inner obstacle? And then P is the plan for overcoming that obstacle. And you might phrase that as like an if then. If this happens, then I will. Or if this happens, then I will. So WOOP combines that sort of positive of like really embodying and envisioning that great future outcome with the reality of where are we now and what are some of the obstacles we face. Okay, so I will also share a link to more information about WOOP in the description. Okay, so we've talked about kind of the day-to-day, regular check-ins. We've talked about when people are stuck. Let's up the stakes just a little bit here and think about maybe a more challenging kind of conversation, perhaps a conversation around performance. And in particular, a case maybe where the person that you're communicating with, again, I'm assuming might be a direct report, perhaps is not performing as needed. Okay, so we're looking to improve the person's performance. To me, an important first step here is some self-coaching, or at least some kind of self-reflection, right? So getting clear on what our objective is for the conversation. My guess is if it's around performance, this is one of many conversations that you either have had or will be having, right? So what is the objective for this particular conversation? You're not going to solve the whole problem today. Importantly, I think it's good for us to spend time on how we'd like to show up, right? So setting that intention, how do I want to show up for this conversation? What do I want, the big takeaway to be, right? Again, back to that objective. And then also, how can I best set myself up for that, right? So getting no sleep the night before and scheduling the conversation right after another high stakes meeting is probably not a recipe for success, right? So how can I set myself up to sort of honor that intention? What kind of support might I need, right? Maybe I need to have a conversation with a couple other people first, or maybe I need to talk with my coach and kind of role play this, right? And then finally, these are just a few, right, that I'm sharing. I'm sure you have many other ideas. What do I want to do if the conversation goes sideways? How do I want to end it? How do I want to get out of it? Whatever, right? So having that plan. So that's the self-coaching, that's before the conversation. Again, now I'm going to invite you to pause the video and take a few minutes to think about what are some questions, if you were going to take a coaching-based approach and use powerful questions in a performance conversation with someone, what are some questions you might ask? Okay, so you will no doubt have questions that are really well suited to your particular context and to the particular individual that you have in mind. I'm going to share, again, just some things that came to mind for me as I was considering this question. I'd love it if you'd share some of your ideas in the comments. I would really like this to be a little bit more of a conversation among us. So I'll share some of my ideas. So I might ask the person, I might start by just asking what's going well. From your perspective, what's going well? I might ask, what challenges are you experiencing? Or maybe again, from your perspective, what's not going quite as well? If this is something where there's been a lot of disagreement or you have very different views on things, maybe there's a question around, what do we agree on? Maybe we can start there, right? Where's the common ground? Certainly important, I think, particularly if it's a supervisory role, to ask how we can be helpful, right? What do you need from me? What do you need from others on the team? What can we shift to make this more doable or easier for you, to set you up for success? Maybe what will it take to close that gap, right? And also getting really clear with the person on what that gap is, which we can do by asking questions and hearing their responses, mirroring back what we hear from them, and then also sharing our own thoughts, right? Maybe what specific steps would you like to take? What do you feel ready to do? And when, right? Sometimes getting people to commit to a timeline can be really helpful. Related to that, how should we check in on this, right? Is this something where you're wanting daily support? Is it something we should just do in our regular check-ins? Do you need a month to just kind of be cut loose and try to do it and see what happens, right? So all of these are powerful questions that we could use in this context. I think in all cases, we want to remember the foundational ideas that underlie coaching that we talked about in the introductory video, right? So the belief that the person that you're working with, that you're engaging with, is creative, resourceful, and whole. So expressing confidence in them, right, and their abilities. If you don't have confidence in them, then we need to kind of question what's happening, and maybe that becomes a different conversation. Both a conversation with yourself, right, around decisions that need to be made, and then also a conversation with the person. Focusing on strengths, right, making the most of what comes naturally for them. That might even be a question, right? Like, how can this feel really natural, right? Or what's your natural tendency? What's your gut telling you? Whatever, right? It's based in genuine care for the person. So oftentimes, challenging behaviors, and I understand that performance not meeting standards doesn't necessarily equate to challenging behaviors. If it does, that often results from some kind of an unmet need. So trying to get a sense of that by listening with empathy, reflecting back, right, using their words. It doesn't mean you have to agree, right, but just allowing them to feel heard. And then, as we talked about in the first video, loose attachment to the outcome. This can be a fine line here when we're talking about performance, right? So perhaps there's a very clear outcome that you need. In other words, a very clear result, maybe something that they need to create or produce, but maybe there's a lot of flexibility in the how, right? So then in that coaching-based approach with powerful questions, you can explore that together. Or maybe there's a lot of ways, right, within this sort of feasible set or acceptable set for them to kind of tick that box of what you're looking for, right? So this is, again, case-by-case basis. Before I wrap up this video, I do want to just share I think it's called brain-friendly feedback approach, since we are talking about sort of performance and feedback. And this was described in a TED Talk. I'll link it, but you can find it very easily, by Leanne Reniger. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. It's very aligned with the coaching approach, which is why I wanted to share it. It's a 4-step process, and it starts and ends with questions. It starts with a short micro yes question, is how she describes it, a micro yes. So it might be something like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about, what just happened in that meeting? Or I have some thoughts about something, maybe how we can improve something. Would it be okay if I share them with you? So it's this signal that feedback is coming, and it gives the receiver the opportunity to say, not the right time, right? I'm not in the headspace, or can we do this another time? So it's that micro yes, so that you're getting their buy-in, at least for this little conversation. Then the second step is to name in very specific terms, with no interpretation, what you heard or what you saw. Maybe it's something like, you said you'd get that email to me by 11, it's noon and I still don't have it, right? So it's factual, we're not layering anything on top of it. Step 3 is to provide a sense of the context, like the impact of that, the purpose, the logic, the context, all related to the impact of that behavior. In the example I just gave, it might be like, because I didn't have that email, blah, blah, blah. This is the result of that, which is undesirable. And then the 4th step is to end with a question. I already mentioned we're bookending this approach with questions. So how do you see it, right? Maybe this is a collaborative approach. Or here's what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And this is a way of creating, I think, commitment rather than compliance, right? Again, you're engaging in this as a collaborator. You are problem solving together, right? A thought partner. So, I'm making this all sound super easy and simple, and we know that it is anything but that. It can be really challenging, right? Especially if we're talking about difficult conversations related to performance or anything else. So please do be patient and kind to yourself. And I also encourage you to take a look at the additional resources that I've linked in the description, and to reflect on your main takeaways from this, and to think a little bit about how might you play around with using powerful questions. And please add any thoughts you have, as I said, ideas that you came up with during this video in the comments, or other questions that you have for me about this process. Thanks again for being here, and thanks for being you.